This current theme is called Encounters with Enlightenment. We're telling stories about the Buddha and encountering people encountering the Buddha. What was it like to meet the Buddha, to encounter enlightenment? And through that story, hopefully we can get a flavour of that, what that might have been like. And this evening, I'm going to tell a story about an encounter the Buddha had, but not with a human, but with a Naga. I'm going to be telling a story about the Buddha encountering a Naga. So what is a Naga? If you've never heard about Nagas before, very, very briefly, well, actually on one of the winter mornings is going to be on the Naga. They're all on a range of symbols, and I know Dennis and Majidasa are going to do a session on Naga, so you can find out more then. But very briefly, it's not really clear what a Naga is, so that's not a kind of straightforward answer. But there's different stories that give you different aspects of what a Naga might be. So those of you who are familiar with the story of Padmasambhava and the founding of Buddhism in Tibet, in that story you get Nagas that are very almost destructive, mischievous, almost opposed to the Dharma. They need to be tamed. They need to be brought on side of the Dharma. So that gives us one way into what a Naga might be. Then you also get a story of the Buddha's enlightenment, where there's a great rainstorm, the Buddha's meditating, and a huge Naga, which is like a serpent-like creature, and wraps itself around the Buddha to protect him. The Buddha's kind of becomes covered in this huge serpent, Naga in a serpent form, which has like many heads and protects the Buddha. So you get the image of the Buddha meditating with this huge kind of being wrapped around him, and then it transforms into a human prince form and bows to the Buddha. So you get a Naga in devotion to the Buddha and in service of the Buddha. And then you get what else do you get? You get the name Naga as a way of referring to the Buddha himself, or to the Buddha's enlightened disciples. The arahants of the Buddha were sometimes called Nagas. There was a term that could mean an arahant, an enlightened being. It can mean a serpent. It can mean a large being. So often it's seen as being a symbol for energy. And particularly, might talk about this more in terms of tantric Buddhism, but energy that's kind of deep within our psyche, within our consciousness, you could see as being symbolized by the Naga, but it's not clear. And I think that's probably best it's left unclear, and you can make your own minds up maybe what Nagas might be. So this is a story that took place, at the time of the Buddha. And it was recently after the Buddha was enlightened. The Buddha had a small following. He had about 64 disciples at that stage. He just very, very recently become enlightened. And he was trying to work out, he's kind of still in the stage of working out how to communicate his experience, and he was just meeting people and trying to share with them his experience. And this story takes place around that time, a place called Uruvela. And it's contained in what's called the Vinaya Pitaka, which basically it's a section of stories which lays out how the rules of the monks were formed. So it's quite an obscure story, but I came across it in two places, in a book called The Life of the Buddha, which you might not be able to see in the bookshop, and another book by Sadaloka, which I really recommend, called Encounters with Enlightenment. I'll maybe put that closer to the camera there. Encounters with Enlightenment. And basically what happens is the Buddha goes to this place, Uruvela, and he encounters a spiritual community of practitioners. And the way that they practice is they worship fire. They're ascetic practitioners, and they worship fire. We're not told too much about what that involves in the story, in the sutta. But what we're told is that there's a leader of these ascetic monks called Kashyapa. And they've got 1,000, there's 3 different groups of them, but there's 1,000 of them all together, 1,000 members of this community. And the Buddha approaches Kashyapa, who's the leader of this community, and he makes a strange request. He just goes up to him and says, I'd like to spend the night in your fire chamber. And Kashyapa is kind of taken aback by the question, but he says to the Buddha, you'd be welcome to stay in my fire chamber, but it's very dangerous. There's a fire-breathing, venomous Naga that lives inside this fire chamber. If you go inside it, you'll be killed. You can't go in the fire chamber. But the Buddha's not put off by this, and he asks a second time, and then he asks a third time, Kashyapa, let me spend the night in your fire chamber. And it's tradition in these stories, when the Buddha asks something 3 times, it happens. Like, people don't refuse the Buddha 3 times. So when the Buddha asks the 3rd time, Kashyapa says, okay, as you wish, if that's what you want to do, you can spend the night in the fire chamber, but there's a fire-breathing venomous Naga there, you'll be destroyed. So the Buddha goes into the fire chamber. We're not kind of told details of what the fire chamber is, what it looks like, but in my imagination, it's a kind of room, maybe the size of, for those who know the red shrine room in the Buddhist center, kind of room about that kind of size, with a big fire-breathing dragon or serpent inside it. And the Buddha, what we're told the Buddha does is he sets up a meditation seat, he puts out a mat, and he starts to meditate, he establishes mindfulness. And we're told that then the Naga is annoyed by this, the Naga is angry about this, and the Naga decides to fill the fire chamber with smoke. So they get this room starting to fill with smoke. And then the Buddha's response is interesting. The Buddha apparently says, well, suppose I counter his fire with fire. And we're told the Buddha produces smoke and fills the fire chamber with even more smoke. And then we're told that the Naga gets really angry and says, right, now I'm going to produce fire. He produces flames, and the fire chamber is filled with fire, with flames. And then we're told the Buddha has a similar response. He said, okay, well, what if I were to produce flames without harming the Naga? And the Buddha produces flames of his own that fill the fire chamber. So there's now a crowd gathering around the fire chamber. A lot of these kind of fire worshippers start to gather around, and we're not sure the tone. It's not clear the tone of this, but they say something along the lines of, "Oh, that monk who is so handsome is going to be destroyed by the Naga," and we're not sure if it's kind of like slightly mocking, or if they genuinely think he's a really handsome monk. But they think the Buddha's done for, he's toast. They see all these flames inside this fire chamber, and they know that's the end of that monk. But what we're then told is at the end of the night, the Buddha emerges out of the fire chamber. And at this point, the Naga has become quite small in size and is curled up inside the begging bowl of the Buddha's begging bowl. And the Buddha just presents the Naga to Kashyapa and says, here you are, Kashyapa, here's your Naga. I countered his fire with fire. And it's the first part of quite a long story. And I won't tell the rest of the story. Kashyapa, basically, he's very puffed up and conceited, and he says, oh, that's impressive to himself, but this great monk isn't as good as me. He's not an arahant like I am. And the Buddha goes, this whole series of things that the Buddha does, and Kashyapa isn't convinced. In the end, the Buddha is very direct with Kashyapa and tells him he's not enlightened. He's not nowhere near enlightenment. He's not doing anything that will make him enlightened. And Kashyapa suddenly falls at the feet of the Buddha and becomes his disciple. And the rest of the community, all 1,000 of these monks, decide to become followers of the Buddha. So the Buddha's community goes from 64 to 1,064 in kind of that short space of time. But what I want to do is just unpack, well, what on earth are we to make of this story of the Buddha and this Naga, the Buddha encountering this Naga? What on earth can we make of this? And I think I want to be clear at this stage that, well, it's a different type of story than the ones that we might have heard so far. This isn't a kind of a rational teaching. It's not a rational story. Something else is happening here. This is in a way, the Buddhism speaking the language of the depths. Maybe I don't know if you were on the intermediate course and you encountered this story of the horse and the rider, and we need to speak. Buddhism speaks the language of the horse. The Buddhism tries to speak to our deeper nature, our non-rational nature. And this is a form that Buddhism does this through symbols, through stories, through myth, through other forms as well. But this is the nature. This story is in that kind of nature. It's a story trying to communicate something maybe that can't quite be communicated in words. I mean, I'm going to try to say something about it in words, but I want you to hold in mind that it's a symbol. The Naga is a symbol. This story is trying to symbolize something which can't be captured in words. And I'm going to give some kind of pointers as to how I relate to it, but it's important that it's kind of not pinned down, that we don't try and rationalize what the meaning is, because then the meaning will be lost, the power and the effect will be lost. It's important that it just stays slightly mysterious. And so with that in mind, maybe what are some of the reflections I've had from this sutta? So to begin with, what on earth is the fire chamber? What could the fire chamber be symbolizing? And for me, when I first heard about the sutta and kind of tried to reflect on the sutta and imagine the sutta, bring it to mind, I think that's what I'd recommend with stories like this. Try and really imagine them and bring them alive in your mind's eye. Try and be, imagine you picture yourself in the scene. Then the kind of the magic of the symbolism can work. It's magic. But for me, a reflection that occurred to me as well, for me, the fire chamber that is locked is really, for me, resonates, reminiscent of the heart in meditation that is locked. And we're not allowed, there's no entry sign on the door of the fire chamber. And for me, this was very much like my own inner world when I first arrived at the Buddhist Center, when I first began to meditate. My inner world was shut off. There was no access, no entry sign on the door. And that's something, in a way, I'd been conditioned through life. I'd learned that I mustn't experience my emotions, I mustn't display my emotions. So for me, that was a very powerful symbol of Kashyap's fire chamber. Was a symbol for me in my own inner world, and parts of it that maybe I didn't want to see, I didn't want to include in my life, I didn't want to include in my awareness. There's bits of me that were no-go areas that I didn't want to know about. Definitely didn't want other people to know about. And in a way, they weren't part of who I was. They weren't part of my identity. But if we want to be enlightened, if we want to transform ourselves, the Dharma really needs to touch all of us. It needs to touch the bits of us that we like and the bits of us that we don't like, and the bits of us that we find pleasant and the bits of us that we are fearful of and frightened of other people finding out about. Dharma needs to include all of us. And so the Buddha kind of going into Kashyap's fire chamber, for me, is a symbol of, maybe if the Buddha represents our higher self or what we aspire to be, it's, it's that aspiration of turning towards what we fear, going into it, unlocking that door of the heart, turning towards it and seeing what's there. And so for me, this, in a way, what this symbolizes is what can happen in the Dharma life, but particularly in meditation, when meditation goes deep and we start to encounter things that maybe we're frightened of, or we fear aspects of ourselves, emotions, drives. So the fire chamber for me symbolizes what we're frightened of, what we've shut ourselves off from. And when we do that, like small things that maybe aren't such a big deal become bigger in our mind's eye, like we fear them, they become more powerful. When we when we fear something, it has more power over us. So something that might have been a small Naga in a begging bowl suddenly is a huge, big kind of demon or monster to us, and it's powerful and it's scary. But turning towards it starts to change it. Turning towards it and sitting with it in meditation can start to change it. So that's the first element of the story that I wanted to draw out this evening. And I've told versions of this story and I've gone into more depth about my own experience and what happened when I started to encounter bits of myself. Largely, it was anger and rage that I had this idea of myself that I wasn't somebody who got angry. I was somebody who was very nice and pleasant to people, easy to get on with. And what I discovered when I started to meditate is that wasn't true at all. There was just loads and loads of anger that I'd been kind of sitting on my whole life. And suddenly, through meditation and awareness, I couldn't hide from it anymore. I had to engage with it. I had to integrate it. And so that's what I started to encounter when after meditating for a while. But if that is maybe to begin one aspect of what the Naga and the fire chamber might symbolize. What's the smoke? Why is there smoke? So for me, in meditation, in a way, we're cunning, our mind and our heart, it's got defenses there, there's protections to stop us from encountering things. Like we can be quite cunning about it. In a way, we don't really want to meet ourselves. So we find ways of avoiding our experience. And often this is typical by the hindrances in meditation. There's kind of the smoky kind of thoughts that kind of enter our mind and distract us and stop us really from encountering what's really there. So it's kind of the thoughts that might be thoughts of doubt about ourselves, anxious thoughts, angry thoughts, lustful thoughts, thoughts of craving, or just this kind of smoke of sleepiness where we just kind of can't be bothered to meditate. So it's the kind of the hindrances as the kind of defenses, the defense mechanism to, maybe we're not ready to encounter what's there. Maybe we don't want to. So maybe that is the smoke. For me, that's how I relate to the smoke that fills the fire chamber. But what does the Buddha do? The Buddha counters that with his own smoke. And I think, in a way, if we experience hindrances in meditation or thoughts, we need to counter that. We need to be thinking, well, is this true? Is this something I need to be anxious about? Is this something I need to be angry about? What is really going on here? What's beneath this? What's beneath these thoughts and this story? And often what's beneath it is emotion. There's kind of maybe some raw emotion that we're hiding from, or we don't want to experience. Often that, for me, that's my experience. And it might be anger, like it was for me. It might be grief, sadness, fear, whatever it is that, usually beneath that kind of smoky layer of distraction and thoughts, there's something there waiting to be met, really, waiting to be befriended. That's another way of looking at it. And so when you do that, when you deal with the hindrances and you turn towards your experience, you get the real heat of the emotion that might be there, or the real heat of the experience that's there. And that might take different forms for you, different people, and at different times it might take different forms, but you get the real heat when you go beneath the hindrances. And how do you respond to that? How does the Buddha respond to that? Well, what are the flames of the Buddha? In a way, how we hold that, how we sit with that, how we meet that experience, it's with kindness. We meet the flames are, for me, flames of metta, the flames of the heart. The flames of the Buddha's heart are flames of kindness, metta, compassion. So we bring a kindly awareness, a kind of compassionate awareness to whatever's there and sit with it. Just sit with it like the Buddha did. The Buddha sat all night with these flames and just sat there. And sometimes when we encounter strong experiences on retreat or in meditation, we've got no choice. We just have to kind of sit there, just sit and really experience it. And for me, I had to do quite a lot of that with the emotion that I'd blocked up when I started to encounter it, just sit with it. And there's different metaphors that capture this for me, but one that really worked was kind of these parts of myself that I'd been frightened of, or experiences that I didn't want to face were a bit like a wild animal. That's how it helped me to think of these bits of myself as like a wild animal. In particular, a cat. I used to have about the same time as I started meditating. We got a couple of cats from the rescue centre the rescue shelter in Broome Hall, and I went with my wife, and we wanted to get one cat, but we ended up getting a pair, which was quite symbolic. There was a kind of friendly, nice cat that we really liked, but it had a sister who was feral and violent and would scratch you if you went near it, and was really frightened of humans. And they came as a pair. If we wanted the nice cat, we got the feral kind of scratchy, scared cat as well. And it reminds me of a dream I had, actually. I wasn't planning to share, but when I was just before I was ordained, I had a dream where I had a cat in my house, but also a cat that shouldn't be there in my house. It was a kind of black cat, and it wasn't my cat. So I kept throwing it out the door, closing the door. And when I turned around, it was there. This cat was there. So I'd try and get rid of it again. I'd try and throw it out. And when I closed the door and came back, it was there again. And when I woke up, it dawned on me, well, in a way, all of me was going to get ordained. I couldn't just choose the bit I liked, and that was going to get ordained. The bits I didn't like, they were going to get ordained as well. They were kind of coming on the journey with me, this kind of... So in a way, you can, if that works for you, for me, the symbolism of a wild animal, a kind of scared, aggressive, angry wild animal worked for me as this kind of image of the bit of me that I was frightened of and didn't want to come on the journey with me. But so we got these two cats, and I had this intuition that what I needed to do, the female cat was called Missy, the male cat is called Tommy, and sadly Missy passed away last year, about this time last year, which was sad. And but Missy, she just used to hide underneath this cabinet and not come out. And if you put your hand near her, she would just lacerate it. You get kind of scratches down your arm from Missy, who just would like shake underneath the cabinet. What I decided I needed to do was just sit in the room and not do anything, just sit there and wait. So I used to do that. I spent like a lot of time in the evening just sitting in the room, not doing anything. And after a while, this cat, Missy, would come out and have a little sniff around and look at me, look around the room, maybe have a bit of food, and then go back and hide again. And then gradually she'd get a bit more confident and she'd come, maybe have a sniff around and go back under again. But maybe after, I don't know, a few months of this kind of behaviour, she let me stroke her when she was having a meal. And then, she let me stroke her more often. And then after, maybe a couple of years, basically she became like a best friend in a way. She kind of just followed me around everywhere around the house and would kind of sleep on my lap. And if I got up to go for a pee, she'd come with me and come back again. It's basically a kind of best friend in a way. So it was a real transformation, but it's kind of a way that's kind of discovered what I needed to do with myself in a way, the bits of myself that were kind of I'd abandoned and was frightened of and feared. And when I went near them would kind of lash out and kind of seem really frightening. Actually, I just needed to sit and be patient and then allow that to kind of transform. So there's a lot of time in meditation on retreat, just sitting with that emotion, experiencing that emotion, not trying to do anything, not trying to change it, but just sitting, experiencing it. And after a while, there's lots of other things I'd had to do outside of meditation as well, ethically, psychologically, to transform this energy in a way. But after a while, that raw anger that I was experiencing did shift and started to change. And when my experience and my friends commented, like when you start to include other bits of yourself, people experience you bigger, larger, like as a larger presence. I remember on my ordination retreat, Satcharaja, who's my public preceptor, said to me, well, you need this energy. I was talking to him about the rage that I'd started to experience. He said, well, you need this energy and it's part of you and you're bigger than you think you are. And anyway, that's the benefit of working with these parts of ourselves and integrating them and transforming them. And I didn't realize the series that we were going to be talking about was about our system of practice. But the first two but it's by coincidence, some of the content of this talk is a bit of like a precursor, like a taster for the series that's to come, because the first two stages of our system are integration and positive emotion, and that involves gathering the different parts of ourselves, getting to know ourselves, and slowly transforming our emotion and our inner world to become more skillful and more positive. And these are the first two stages, integration and positive emotion. So for me, that's what's symbolized by the Buddha sitting all night in meditation with mindfulness, with the flames, and then coming out at the end of the night with the Naga in his bowl, kind of at his command in a way. It's all that power, all that kind of raw energy symbolized by that angry Naga was now, just tame, friendly, sitting in the begging bowl of the Buddha. Okay, so that's one reflection that stayed with me for quite a long time around this sutta, what this sutta might mean. I've had some more recent reflections, so if there's a bit of time, I'll just share briefly some more recent, different reflections around this sutta. And I want to be clear, like there's no right or wrong way of interpreting symbolism in Buddhism. It has to speak to you. You have to kind of sit with it, reflect on it, see what it means to you. And it might mean different things at different times. More recently, I've been reflecting about, well, what might the Naga and the fire chamber symbolize, these flames. And there's a danger of this being, a bit too rational, a bit too psychological. And there's a danger of Buddhism being a bit too rational and a bit too psychological as well. That is a danger. And the later stages of the path that we'll talk about in the next series include spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. And so for me, once we started to integrate different aspects of ourselves, gather that energy, there's still more to discover in the heart. There's still more to discover in the depths of our heart or the fire chamber. What is it? What are the powerful energies and the powerful drives at the center of our heart and in the depths of our heart? What is it that we really, really deeply care about? What is it that we really, really desire and long for? In a way that, there's that element of the Naga and those energies. What is at the depths of our heart? And then humiliatingly for me, what I really deeply care about is myself. Actually, that, the more, I look deeply into what's there at the core of my being, it's selfishness, it's the ego. And that needs to be tamed. That, the flames, the fire, the potency, the kind of drives of the ego need to be tamed. And that is what Buddhist practice is really about, actually. And the element of spiritual death is where we really see the emptiness of that. We really see through flames and the heat and those drives of our ego, of that selfishness, and that can then be transformed. But really, we can only do that if there's something powerful enough to attract our deeper energies. That isn't about, if it's not going to all be about me, what's my life going to be about? So right in the depths of our heart, right in the fire chamber, we need the Buddha. We need the Buddha blazing with flames. We need the Buddha, the Buddha on fire in our hearts. Because if it's not, then ultimately we're going to be drawn towards craving and aversion and ignorance. What we need to place right in the center of our hearts is the Buddha, and the Buddha needs to be on fire. Like, we need to really long for that ideal symbolized by the Buddha. We need to really see the beauty of it and really love it, and the desire to bring it about in the depths of our being. And if we can do that, the more we can cultivate that, the more we can be attracted and drawn towards what the Buddha represents, what the Buddha symbolizes, the more we can transform our deeper nature, our deepest energies, symbolized by the Nagas. And so that's the element of spiritual rebirth practice. We get an image of enlightenment that speaks to us, and then we love it. We learn to love it. We really see the beauty of what we could be, the beauty of the ideals. And the more we can love it, the more we'll be drawn towards it, instead of drawn towards selfishness and our ego and craving. So that's spiritual rebirth, which goes alongside spiritual death. And yet, there's one last tale, Buddhist theme involving Nagas, is the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So if you're very new, you probably never heard about this, and don't worry about that. But there's a whole school of Buddhism which is quite esoteric and quite mysterious. And the Heart Suture, if you've ever heard the Heart Suture in Puja, comes out of the Perfection of Wisdom tradition. And the Perfection of Wisdom is all about emptiness, the emptiness of our ideas, the emptiness of our ideas about reality, the emptiness of our ego in a way, ultimately. And it's said that the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, the person who discovered them was called Nagarjuna. The person who taught them was called Nagarjuna. He was named after the Nagas. And the legend has it that the Nagas preserve this teaching. They look after this teaching. It's like the treasure that the Nagas guard until people are ready for it, until there's people ready to practice this teaching. So the legend was that these texts were given and presented to Nagarjuna by a Naga princess. They were the guardians of this treasure, the guardians of wisdom. So that's another potential aspect of Nagas. And I think, in a way, I think I've come towards the end of my tale for now, this tale of the Buddha and the fire chamber, this sutta. And it is a story that I love. I mean, I love the symbolism of Nagas. I love this story. And, hopefully some of the meanings will resonate with you, and it might have completely different meanings for you as well. And over time, and that's fine. That's, the power of this language Buddhism speaks, a language of the depths, a language of symbolism. As I said earlier, it's better not to try and pin it down too tightly to what it might mean. But they're just some reflections about this strange tale, this very strange tale of the Buddha sitting all night in a fire chamber with a fire-breathing Naga, and then coming out having tamed it at the end of the night. Yeah, so the Buddha and the fire chamber. Thank you.